I welcome everyone to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee on Thursday, the 9th of November, from the Walton Room Suite at Winchester Guildhall. The time is 6:30 p.m. My name is Councillor Margot Power, Chairperson of the committee. The meeting is live streamed from the Council's YouTube channel, and the recording will also be available after the meeting. Subtitles can be switched on, and advice on how to turn these on is set out on our website. Can I remind members to use their microphones, and can everyone ensure mobile phones are on silent? In the unlikely event that it's necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. And I welcome members of the public to the meeting this evening. We will invite you forward when it is time for you to make your contribution. Turning to the agenda. Apologies, Mrs. Graham.
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Atchwell, for whom Councillor Eve is deputising, and Councillor Miller, for whom Councillor Bolton is deputising.
Thank you, Mrs. Graham. And do we have any disclosures of interest? None. Thank you very much. I have no announcements. Could we turn to the Audit and Governance Work Programme, please, on pages 5 to 6? Do we have any questions? Excellent. Thank you. And then the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 11th of October 23, pages 7 to 10. Any questions? Are those agreed? Councillor Godfrey.
Madam Chairman, do we have an update on the external audit proposals for the last year and for the next year?
Mrs. Keys? No.
No, we're yet to hear from the external auditors about their audit plan. I believe they're going to be coming in to start their value for money work, but the code audit on the statement of accounts, we've not heard anything.
Thank you, Mrs. Keys. Are the minutes agreed? Thank you very much. We turn now to public participation. Mr. Davis, would you like to come up to the, I think you know the protocol for public participation.
Chair, thank you very much. I'm grateful to be able to say a few words now, because I hope to stay for the rest of the meeting, but it depends how long we take before we reach items 9 and 10. What I want to say on 9, it's merely, merely because there is a reference in the paper there to the matters under the Constitution, and it's on the Constitution. I just wanted to say a few words. Believe it or not, 50 years ago, when I was first a councillor, we were involved in the constitution of the new district council, which took over the following April. And I've been involved and interested in these issues ever since, because it's always seemed to me the most important thing is to be able, in all our documentation, to engage with the public at the earliest opportunity. And my fear in the Constitution documents in front of you today, you're not recognising that necessity, although there's lots of references to the admirable intention to do so. And the real object of my few remarks today is the use of informal groups, which are nowhere referred to in the Constitution except and this is one of the difficulties why I brought my toy here, because there are so many papers, 26 attachments, and to try and pull this all together is not easy. But in the page 119, where it lists out interpretation section of terms used in the Constitution, and nowhere there is there any reference to working parties, panels, informal groups, etc., etc. And as far as I can find it, the only reference at all to this issue is in Article 15 on page 159 to 162, where in the context of party whips, oddly, there is the only reference I can find to working groups or panels. And I just refer back, I'm not sure many people in the room were involved, when the horrors of Silver Hill were first investigated. One of the issues that the inspectors, yes, technically she wasn't an inspector, referred then to the problem the City Council had with using informal reference groups, which met in private, received no public involvement, did not publish minutes or findings, etc., etc. And the council were meant to take this point up, and they never did, in my view, properly. And we now have the situation where you have even more informal groups covering a multitude of sins, most of which never produce minutes and never seen, occasionally referred to. Last night at the town forum, there was a shoal of references to informal working groups, not a bit of paper, and nobody quite knew how many there were or who was reporting back. And that was just symptomatic, in my view, of the way the council operates and has always operated, quite contrary to its own constitution. Because in my view, those bodies ought to be properly constituted with terms of reference, with printed agendas, and available to the public at the time when issues are first discussed. And the council now seems to, and ironically, this very paper was discussed by an informal group. I don't remember it ever being appointed. Perhaps it was somewhere in the minutes, but I've missed it. And it met 7 times. Well, those meetings ought to have been in public so that people like me who are interested in these matters could have known what was going on at an earlier stage. And it's quite wrong to deal with them in this arbitrary and informal sense, at the same time as you're approving a constitution which is allegedly following all the rules and is covering every eventuality. But in my view, you are missing out on this vital part of local democracy because you do not properly present in front of the public, let alone your own members, precisely what is happening and when it is happening. And I think you need to review this whole situation further so that all informal groups are properly constituted and are referred to in the constitution, not as an afterthought to something about the whip. The town forum I've already referred to. I'm far from clear, looking at what's now proposed, whether the role of the town forum is properly explained, not least on how it deals with planning issues. Last night, a member who, not from the town forum, came and raised planning issues, and there was then a discussion with the cabinet member responsible. This seems to be entirely the wrong way of going about it. It needs to be clarified so that everyone knows exactly what the rules are. And in my view, the papers in front of you tonight do not properly address these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I hope you can stay for the debate on the Constitution. And we will look at this. Thank you very much. Could we move on to Treasury Management, please? The mid-year report, pages 11 to 24. Mr. O'Rourke, I believe you're introducing this paper.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good evening, members. So this report covers the Treasury Management activity in the first half of 23-24, and by doing so, therefore, builds on what was reported in the quarter-run report at the last meeting. As was covered at the last meeting, there was one incidence of a breach of the Treasury Management strategy. I won't dwell on that, given that this was covered previously, but other than that, everything was complied with in the strategy. Key update in terms of the economic background, as I'm sure the committee is aware, is the somewhat stabilisation of interest rates that have taken place. So for some context, bank rate was up to 5.25% in August, but was subsequently held at the Monetary Policy Committee's meeting in September at the same rate before being held again in the meeting of last week. Arling Close, our Treasury advisor, they do an interest rate forecast, and their forecast is now suggesting that this is the peak of interest rate hikes. with rate cuts taking place from the third quarter of next year onwards. And what we're actually seeing is that prices are these cuts are beginning to be priced into the market as well. Looking at table 1, net borrowing has reduced since March and has also reduced compared to the end of June, so the end of quarter 1, by 2.5 million. Looking at the borrowing update and strategy, no new borrowing has been taken on and there's been no change to the level of existing borrowing in the period, so still at 161.7 million. And as highlighted in the quarter 1 report, this borrowing need has been identified, so new borrowing will be required in the future, but that position remains unchanged from the quarter 1 position. The investments update. So investment balances have increased by 2.5 million from the end of quarter 1 at June, and actually have increased by 7.7 million from March at the end of the previous financial year. And that extra cash has primarily been invested into money market funds, lending to other local authorities and some high quality bonds. Looking at the investment benchmarking, so bail-in risk has reduced slightly from the June position, with the average maturity of the investment portfolio increasing slightly, and that can be primarily attributed to less investment in some unsecured options like bank deposits and money market funds, which are highly liquid, and the move to this local authority lending and investment in bonds where there is no bail-in risk attached with those investments. Moving to the pooled funds. So as at the end of September, there is a small unrealised gain on the value of the pooled property fund, which stands or stood at the end of September at 0.2 million. We have engaged with Arling Close in the last few weeks to discuss a possible redemption on that pooled property fund, but the view of both Arling Close and ourselves subsequent to that discussion was that actually the market appears, or the property market appears to have bottomed out. Arling Close certainly are expecting rises in the property market, and actually by holding on to that position, it offers us a chance to exit and realise a potentially larger gain later on down the line. There is also no real need at this point to redeem this fund, given the good levels of return that it's offering, and there is no liquidity requirement, and it does take a period of time to unwind from this position. But of course, this will be reviewed ahead of any need to borrow presenting itself. And the final point is just on the liability benchmark, just to say that it does, as previously covered, highlight this need to borrow that's upcoming, but that the position on the liability benchmark hasn't changed from the quarter 1 report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very full report. Do we have any questions for the Treasury Management team? Councillor Bolton, thank you.
Thank you for that. So just one question. Do you or Arling Close run or model realistic disaster scenarios? So things like 5 to 10% collapse in share prices, or a Labour government, for example, and see, to run through the effects that would have on the makeup of our investment portfolio.
So this isn't something that we do personally. The scenario of a Labour government, as an example, this isn't the sort of modelling that we do. Arling Close, as our Treasury advisors, do undertake a number of modelling exercises. I'm not sure whether a Labour government being an outcome is one specific example that they've necessarily modelled yet. But certainly there are a number of factors and a number of things that Arling Close look at, and we obviously engage with them as our Treasury advisors to provide that advice.
Councillor Cutler, thank you.
I just suggest that Councillor Bolton attends the Arling Close. You have, that'd be a good place to ask that question, actually.
I can't recommend those Arling Close sessions enough. They are very valuable. Thank you. Any other questions?
Ah,
Mrs. Farley, thank you.
It's not a question, but just to let you know that on Monday is the next Arling Close briefing for members.
Have all members got that in their diary? It is very good. Thank you. Where are we asked to? Any debate on this paper? In that case, we're asked to note it. Are we agreed that we will note the report? Thank you very much. Could we then go to the next paper, which is the final report and pay policy, pages 25 to 62. Mr. O'Reilly, where are you? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've been moved by my names here. So the pay policy statement sets out which is City Council's policies relating to the pay of its workforce for the financial year 2024 to 25. Pay policy statement is presented to ANG to be recommended to full council for adoption. Pay policy statement for 24-25 does not contain any substantial changes to the pay policy statement for 23-24. Any questions?
Do we have any questions, councillors? Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm always worried by no change in any paper. Reference is made to the in section 3.33 on page 33. Not good for this. About the council's pay structure. Last year the council gave a bonus increase to staff to achieve various aims, including rewards for the COVID period. What has been the impact on the pay structure and on rewards in general across the council of that additional sum?
Well, the increase in terms of an additional point to most grades in the council, as you know, took place on the 1st of April 2023. And this pay policy statement is from the 1st of April 2024. So we're having a look back in that question. We're hoping, obviously, that will stabilise and reduce turnover from the high of 16.1%, I think it was when I last spoke to you. It's now coming out to 15%, so we have got a movement in the right direction, albeit quite a small one. So hopefully by the time I do the next annual workforce report to this committee in the summer, we'll see the turnover has come down even further to my aspiration of 12%. So that's what we're hoping for.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Councillor Chamberlain, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. Section 3.4, it alludes to the council from time to time undertaking market reviews on homes. How often does council undertake that, and when was the last time that was undertaken?
Sorry, that's 3.43 about market supplements. Yeah, that's the question. The number of market supplements that we have in the council is, off the top of my head, below 10. The last time we made a decision on this was about a month ago.
And forgive me, because I misheard the number you were clarifying. So specifically the question, if I read section 341 correctly, and forgive me if I misunderstand it, it looks like you undertake a benchmarking review to assess kind of market pay. So the question was, how often is that typically undertaken, and when was the last time it was undertaken?
The last time that a full benchmark review was undertaken was when the Southeast Employers Organisation still organised one that we could participate in. That system has now changed, so that it's now a London-based system, which we don't participate in for obvious reasons. So, so the last time we had a full review was probably before I was here, so it'd be 2019 or earlier. What we do now is that we do job-specific benchmarking exercises. So if we have difficulties, for example, in planning or whatever, we'll contact other local councils to see what they're paying for similar jobs if they had the time to get back to us, which is an increasing problem these days. We're getting other councils to actually engage in doing that because we're also busy. But so there's a bit more job or role specific, we're better putting it, than the full benchmarking exercise that we would like to do. But that's when you can just input into a system that someone else is organising for you. And it's quite a big exercise to try and do it yourself. And even then you have to assume that everybody else is going to cooperate, which they don't any longer, I'm afraid.
Any other questions? Councillor Bolton, thank you.
It sort of follows on a little bit from that, in that, do you have a clear picture of where, or does someone have a clear picture of where we lose staff to go to? Do they go to jobs in that comparable market that you take the sort of benchmarking from, or are we losing them to the commercial sector as well? And therefore, my sort of question is, how do you deal with that problem if that truly is an issue that you have to deal with?
We do produce some stats for that with our annual workforce report, which is that we produced for this committee in the summer, and it shows that the people who aren't retiring or leaving for other reasons, then the majority, slight majority, go to the public sector. Others go to the private sector. Public sector ones tend to be the jobs that only are in the public sector, so things like planning officers and so on. Jobs where you can switch easily between private and public tend to depend on the economy and the market. So engineers or surveyors will often go to the private sector if things are booming, will often come to us if the cycle goes the other way. Some other professions like finance, HR, legal, that can vary. Again, NIT can vary very much according to the market. So coming up to the year 2000, it was very hard to get IT people. The private sector was paying a lot more. After the crash in 2008, it was quite easy to get IT people, so you didn't pay market supplements for anymore. So it's always a moving target, to be honest.
And Councillor Chamberlain again, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So last question for myself. What's interesting is obviously what's not mentioned in the report is the use of contractors as consultants. And I dare say if that was factored in, then some of the data sets sort of presented would be materially different. What I was curious about is from a council perspective, how do you monitor, should we say, the tipping point where there may be a short-term need for a contractor or a consultant, that may materially change in action to a mid-term or a longer-term need. How do you assess and keep on top of that so that your kind of emergent employee need, and therefore, who you bring as employee resource is kept on top of?
As far as bringing in contractors or agency workers or interims, locums, they've got different kind of names, they're all just the same thing. We do keep track of them by, HR report to the Executive Leadership Board about the number of contractors that are in the council, where they are, what particular parts of the council they are, how much that's costing us. And then we track that against how many posts are vacant in the council, because an assumption is that if a service can afford to get a contractor, and they must be getting the money from not filling a vacant post. And they probably haven't filled it because they've advertised it several times and haven't been able to fill it, and they've had to go to the market to get a contractor and to do the job. Sometimes, however, especially for a specific project, you only really want a contractor in. You don't want to take somebody onto the books full time, because then you're not going to be here very long, and they have very specific skills, and probably they wouldn't want to join the council. They'd rather come in and do what they do and move on. So the reasons why people bring in contractors is something which is discussed regularly, and strategic directors are discussing with their corporate heads of service. Here's a list of contractors, they've been here this long, why are they still here, what's the reasons behind that? Here's some vacant posts, why are they still vacant, why haven't they been advertised? Making sure that there's sound reasons behind that, and it isn't just a case of somebody brought in a contractor and sort of forgot that they're a contractor and let them carry on being paid in a more expensive way than it would have been to recruit them. So it's something that HR actively keep under review.
Mr. O'Reilly, would it be sensible to include the summation of your analyses in this area in your annual report?
Happy to add a section to that effect, Chair.
Any more questions on this? Councillor Godfrey, thank you.
Thank you. As you know, I've been on council for more than 1 year. I'm always very proud to announce, to remind members that I was one who introduced the living wage accreditation to the council at the behest of our Labour councillor colleague Janet Berry at the time. So I'm always want to make sure that we are sticking by the rules of that accreditation. By noticing section 4.4 of your report, page 46, that the lowest wage being paid to our directly employed staff is in the grade 3 range. Now, I believe the living wage at the moment is £12 an hour, which is about £23,500 a year equivalent. Are we abiding ourselves by the terms of the living wage accreditation?
Yes, we are. Our payroll manager ensures that the foundation living wage is included in the increase to our salaries on the 1st of April after the announcement of the increase, which usually comes in the autumn. I think it's been released this week or next week. So from next April, we'll make sure that everybody in the council, other than apprentices, is paid that.
Thank you, councillors. Is there any debate on this paper? None, thank you. It's slightly different. We are asked to recommend this pay policy to council. Are we agreed that we may do so? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, councillors. Let us move on to governance monitoring on pages 63 to 96 of your papers. Mr. Howson, I believe you're introducing this paper.
Thank you, Chair. This report provides an update to members on the usual suite of governance indicators that we report on a quarterly basis. This report covering Q2, the period July to September of this year. The report includes an update on the internal audits that were finalised and issued during the quarter, of which there were 7 reports finalised and issues, of which the opinion was either reasonable or substantial. So no internal audit reports issued with an opinion of either no or limited assurance, which is obviously great news. The report goes on to provide an update against the overdue internal audit actions, of which for this period, at the end of the period, was 13 internal audit actions, which is a few more than it was at the end of the last quarter's report. And what we've done is we've provided an update in the report of the progress of those actions, and where possible, an indicated date of when we expect those actions to be completed. As these are regularly monitored by Executive Leadership Board, and we regularly work with our colleagues to ensure that these actions don't get forgotten, and we try to ensure that they are completed in a timely manner and within the target dates that are set. The report goes on to provide an update on risk management on the corporate risk register, which was reviewed by Executive Leadership Board last month, and there's a narrative included in the report against where there have been some changes against those risks. The report in Appendix A provides an update on the issues that were included in the 22-23 annual governance statement and a progress update against those individual actions that were included in that report earlier this year. A further appendix includes an update on the Code of Conduct complaints, which at the moment were 2 complaints that were received during the quarter, and say an update on the progress of those complaints is included in the report. Mr. Harvey is with us here to take any questions on the internal audit progress report, which is also included in the report. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Howson. Do we have any questions? First of all, on the report itself. I have one. Mr. Howson, there were 4 actions that were due for completion on the 30th of September. Do you have any good news for us on those 4 actions?
I do, Chair. One of those actions I was notified today was completed, relating to the climate action audit. The other Three are being well progressed and certainly are intending to be completed before the end of the year. There's the action relating to the licensing audit and the introduction of KPIs, which the team are working through. And I know that the team have made good progress on the housing management responsive repairs, looking at the recharging to tenants where appropriate, including the tenancy handbook. So good progress has been made, yes.
And are those line managers aware of the expectation that the audit and governance will expect to hear from them if those are still undone at the next meeting?
We do remind them of that and say we work hard with them and ensure that those actions are completed. It's always an opportunity for them to come along and explain if they haven't completed them if required.
Thank you, Mr. Howson. Do we have any questions on the action plan update? That's pages 73 and 74. Any questions on the internal audit report, pages 75 to 86? Lovely. And any questions on the code of conduct complaints report on page 87? And on the risk assessment, pages 88 to 95, Councillor Godfrey, thank you.
Thank you. Without reiterating my concerns from the last meeting on risk CRO 07, that the current controls seem unlikely to drive down the risk as far as it has been shown. I would like reassurance that the current residual risk of that risk, the lack of sufficient funding, is in the eyes of a 151 officer still correct, and that we do not face any immediate risk of going bust.
Thank you, Mrs. Keys.
Yes, I'm happy to reassure committee that I don't fear that is the case. We'll be bringing forward a medium-term financial strategy to Cabinet in the next couple of weeks, and that will set out the medium-term financial strategy for the council.
Thank you, Mrs. Keys. Councillor Godfrey.
I'm grateful for that. One detail of the current controls there is that the TC25, the strategic review, is now being implemented. I didn't know we'd actually announced this or agreed it or done anything with it.
This has been ongoing since my time as
Started.
would you like update, Mrs. Keys, or would you like Mr. Cutler Councillor Cutler to handle that? I think Councillor Cutler is champing at the bit.
Thank you, Chair. The TC25 process is well underway, so perhaps it isn't entirely correct to say it's being the process is being implemented. The results of that process are yet to be announced, and we are in a position where all corporate heads have produced their ideas, which will be analysed by myself and the chief executive and the leader over the next 6 weeks. We have a rolling number of meetings, which unfortunately will not be open to the public, Mr. Davis, because this is very much internal workings. From that, we will be able to work out the themes, the cross-cutting themes that emerge from it, and devise a programme around that, but also, sort of give the green light to progress with some of those that are within the service rather than the cross-cutting ones. So the aim of the TC25 is to look at broad which areas are identified across the piece, I suppose, and where we need to work across the council. Digitalisation being one example is likely to be a theme that will come through. I think some aspects of customer service look as if they'll, and rather than each area deal with that. Let's look at it as a piece. So I may be going further, you know, I hope I'm not prejudging, because we will have a series of these so-called star chamber meetings over the next few months. And I'm suggesting that some of these themes will arise, and then we will develop the work programme around those themes. So the process is being implemented. The actions arising out of the process have yet to reach that stage.
Could you give us an indication of when we might see the detail of some of those actions to be undertaken? And I think that might reassure Councillor Godfrey and Mr Davis.
Chair, yes, I'm pleased to be able to set out some of the detail of the plans that are in place in the medium-term financial strategy due to be published in the next week.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Councillor Bolton.
Before we get on to publishing the outcome, will councillors be involved in this process at all to give their views and ideas?
Councillors have already been asked to give their ideas, but after before, you know, they're invited to give any ideas that they can see at the moment. That will all be brought into the process of the Star Chambers side of things. We will look at the priorities that are emerging from it before then discussing it more broadly. I think that will be the approach. We will make some proposals, and that they will obviously come to the relevant committees.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cutler. Any other questions? I do have a slight update on phosphate credits. Despite the best efforts of Her Majesty's government, it does appear that the market for nutrient credits is alive and kicking and very profitable for some of those with private wastewater treatment arrangements, which is encouraging, I think. Do we have any debate on this paper? Excellent, thank you. We are asked to note the content of the report, including the progress against the internal audit management actions, and we have raised any issues with the Cabinet member. Thank you. Are we happy that we move on? Thank you very much. And now to the Winchester Constitution. How I intend to handle this is that Mrs Evans does brief introduction, then we hear from councillors that have asked to speak on the matter, and then we will take sections of the code of the report in manageable chunks, having questions and debate on each section. I hope that will go well.
Two things, Madam Chairman. Did you say you're going to deal with the report in chunks or the Constitution in chunks?
Sections of the report as one chunk, and then various parts of the Constitution. Let's see how we get on. I hope it will become evident as we go along.
I'm trying to make this as brief as possible, this debate or this discussion, and have no wish to prolong it, because I'm happy with the direction of travel. But I'm concerned that if we deal with a report, as all the questions which will come later would appear.
Councillor Godfrey, I know I can rely on you to challenge the process should you feel we're wandering. I have complete faith.
My second question is, what is it that we're looking at? The Constitution which is attached to the report, is this the proposed paper that is going to go to council for approval, or is it a partly completed document?
It may be that we make some recommendations as part of this meeting. I know I have a few on my list, and I'm sure you have on yours. So we will try to manage that process so that those recommendations are clear and concise. We have faith. Thank you. Mrs. Evans, would you like to give us a brief introduction? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm completely with Councillor Godfrey in that I would like to make the process as easy and as manageable as possible. So what I'm planning to do is just a very kind of brief introduction. And then, as our Chair has said, we'll hopefully be able to hear from members, from those that have asked to speak. But again, with Chair's permission, and I'll be guided by the Chair, I'm happy to pick up at certain points where we need to. So what I wanted to do was just kind of give a little bit of background and a little bit of detail. So obviously I was appointed in January of this year. I was told, and I believe this to be right, that a full and detailed review of the Constitution was undertaken between 2017 and 2019 and was presented at full council in March of 2019. And that is the new and current Constitution that we adopted, and it came into effect in May. So what we have done is a lighter touch review. I say that again, lighter touch, that's what it was meant to be. That isn't taking away from any of the hard work that those that have been involved in this review have undertaken, because a lot has gone into this review and it has been done very, very well and very, very thoroughly. But so my remit here was that I was to do a lighter touch review to ensure that the Constitution remains fit for purpose, as it already was, but we needed to ensure consistency between the various parts and make sure, this is my main role, that it meets legal requirements and aims to improve where possible the quality of the drafting to make it clear and more comprehensible. So what happened was a cross-party constitution working party was put together, and that comprised of Councillor Becker, Councillor Horrell, Councillor Godfrey, Councillor Wallace, Councillor Tippett-Cooper, Councillor Small and Reach, and they assisted with this work, and it was with me. I was the only officer involved. Lessons learned for next time, I will be bringing other officers with me just to help with the absolute multitudes of kind of paperwork and keeping, you know, everything together. Now, as I said, this was a thorough review, and as Constitution Working Party, we met seven times. I believe it was 8, because I think we had one more that was that we met after writing this report, and we page turned. We went through the whole of the Constitution, and it was discussed at length. And there is no report that I think I could put together that could reflect actually the amount of discussion and robust conversation that we had. It was incredibly helpful for me, and I hope for those that were involved. Now, the report does show my highlight, the proposed changes that have been put forward. The Constitution Working Party had their own, and we've incorporated much of those. They're shown highlighted in green, and the yellow are a lot of those typographical changes, language changes, those that have been done for consistency, where we've made sure that the naming of officer roles are correct and up to date, and again picking up any errors and omissions. So those are in yellow, or where they are my possible amendment or recommendation. We are hoping to pick up, we've done a lot of it as we've gone along, but again, before this goes to print, if it's approved and as approved at full council, we will be looking at page numbering, formatting. It's been difficult because some of the templates that we've worked on have originated from 2017 when the first review was started. And so we need to make sure that the formatting numbering is fully addressed. What we want to have, which we don't have, is an intelligent contents page, so you can go to what you're on the index, find what you're looking for, and actually go to that page. We don't have that yet, so we're hoping to put that in place. And again, special regards in this review was taken to existing and emerging legislation, Brexit, we'll come to that when we get to the relevant parts, and making sure that this constitution set out the tone and the culture of the council and how we wish to operate. So that's my brief introduction, Chair. And we have recommendations that come with this report on page 1 of my report. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans. May we now have councillors to speak, please? The first on my list is Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Chair. Right, as part of the Constitution Working Party, I thought it was important to speak at this meeting. As you're aware, the Constitution Working Party included members from each of the groups, and I sat on the Working Party as a representative from the Green Group. As you heard, we did a page turn of the entire Constitution in 8 3-hour sessions. Whilst this could have been very painful, the group approached the task positively. Many issues were raised, discussed at depth, and then in many cases consensus was reached on the way forward to propose and that's what you're seeing before you. Some of the issues included some of the ones that particularly resonate with me with the frequency of full council meetings, the recent 9-month gap between meaningful council meetings, when we had a meeting in February, and then the next one was in September, the next meaningful one. Didn't feel correct and left a feeling of a democratic deficit, particularly as it meant that newly elected members did not get the opportunity to contribute to a council meeting until 4 months after they were elected. Another one was the role of councillors on external bodies. Councillors are appointed to these bodies at the beginning of the year, but then the members often hear nothing more until the following year when a new member is appointed. To address both those issues, one of the proposed changes to the Constitution is to require council representatives to South Downs National Park and push to report out to full council. This should mean that there's less chance of council meetings getting cancelled in the future, and also fills a clear gap in reporting out to council. Other issues were more practical. For example, the meeting procedure for cabinet meetings is not well set out in the current Constitution. This has been updated in the draft, but just so nobody gets worried, but this doesn't change what happens at cabinet, but makes it more clearly defined. It wasn't very well defined in the current Constitution. Finally, a number of issues were raised, which, following discussion, it was proposed, it was agreed that no changes were necessarily needed to the Constitution. But the application of the Constitution needed to be strengthened. So how we actually apply the Constitution, and these included, for example, access to information and scrutiny of the cabinet decisions. So this is why there's a number of actions taken from the review alongside the proposed Constitution changes. So they're captured in the report as well. Hopefully, therefore, the 2023 proposed Constitution is an improvement over the current version, but I look forward to hearing and comments from members at both of this meeting and future ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. And then we have Councillor Horrell, please.
Yeah, good evening. Yeah, good evening, and thank you for allowing me to address the committee. I welcomed the opportunity to participate in the Constitutional Working Party because in 2019, when we updated the Constitution, We promised a review a year later. Clearly, COVID interrupted that promise, and so I'm glad we've been able to undertake the work now. And it's been a chance to meet legal requirements and make that correct and improve the flow of the Constitution, and that is to be supported. I very much endorse the commitment to ensure there is an officer session, and indeed I recommend a councillor session too, as detailed in section 4 of the report before us this evening. That will ensure we all understand the detail of the Constitution and how it should be applied. Why is that important? Because in the working party discussions, it transpired there were many issues covered by the current Constitution, but they were just not ably understood or enacted. So if we all understand it more, we'll be able to do more. And I hope A&G this evening will endorse the approach with the officers and indeed councillors to have that educational opportunity. I welcome the decision in 12.6 to have annual updates from councillors representing the district on external bodies such as South Downs National Park. I believe that will fill a current democratic deficit when we only hear from one year to the next when these individuals are appointed. I also welcome the annual review of the Constitution proposed in 12.18, which allows the Constitution to be a living document and always reflecting the best governance for the district. Keeping an eye on it annually will actually be helpful to us all. Chair, however, a couple of points of clarification. 12.17, which is part of Article 14, it has not been updated to reflect the under £10,000 contracts, which I believe the Working Party all agreed should be referenced in writing, not just verbally, which it currently says. If I've missed that, I apologise, but maybe the monitoring officer can advise me where we have that detailed. I'm also very disappointed not to see a proposed completion date for the next steps in 14.2. As the monitoring officer knows, I've talked about the code of conduct endlessly because that element was not completed in the 2019 review. It was left off and we'd said we'd come back to it later. Again, we're saying we'll come back to it later. It really must be completed this time in a timely manner. And I would recommend this is signed off by council before the commencement of the next municipal year. And I ask whether the committee would consider this further clarification in your paper AG 117. And finally, Chair, having been party to those 8 meetings, I'm disappointed tonight to find the draft Constitution document before us is still not the final version. We know, having been through the process, that there are some key elements that need to be clear so everyone understands how the Constitution works. Page numbers, hyperlinks, paragraph numbers that are not right, incorrect references, and typographical errors. They still prevail and will impede people's understanding of the document if we don't get those right. I appreciate it's a laborious task, but one that we must commit to undertaking. So my question to you is, when will the definitive version be tabled? And can I seek your commitment, A&G, that the Working Party and the Monitoring Officer will see the final version before papers are published for Council, and that we're not correcting it on the hoof at Council? Many thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chairman, for this opportunity to pass my comments forward. I will lighten the load for you in the sense that I'm only dealing with two aspects. And that is Article 10, the area committees and forums. Under 12.12, Part 2, reference to the MDA forums. 10.2, 10.
Councillor Reid, could we have a page number, please?
Oh, page 50. 106. It's the only one I didn't put a page number on. 10.2 identifies the forums on page 152. When the forum covers more than 2 or more local authorities, meetings should be held in person at a venue convenient to the area of the development in order to show cooperation and integration with the surrounding community. That is the reasons that we gave right at the very start of the forum when it was originally set up. I was unable to find the appropriate location in the Constitution which defines the forum's representation. Currently, the Western Waterlooville Forum has 5 members and 1 reserve. Some years ago, the said forum had evolved to what I understand to be the current situation, that only the ward members, only the members of the wards affected would be eligible to sit on the forum. In the past, a member from an outside ward was removed from the forum membership, but here we go again. We've got yet another person from outside sitting on the forum. Holding the forum online has seen the members of the public locked out. Many of the members of the public that turned up were, shall we say, quite elderly, but very experienced and not able to cope, presumably, with the electronic communications. I must admit, I find it difficult on many occasions. Maybe there is another way to determine the forum membership. It's the same as the Winchester Town Forum is defined, and that it is the members of the town. So the members of the wards affected would seem to be a sensible way to move forward. So there is no reserve. All, in this case, would be 6 members would sit on the forum. Moving on, if I may, Chair, to the Joint Planning Committee. On page 117 refers to the regulatory and other committees. There appears to be some confusion over the pagination. At the bottom of page 51, we're dealing with, I'm sorry, wrong page number. We're dealing with a situation where the numbering is out. We appear to have 2 number 8s, and what's under the second number 8 is actually number 7. So, and that is on page 118. 10.2 defines the planning committee on page 151. 3.131, the planning committee, and 1.10 defines the joint planning committee on page 196, identifies the joint planning committee functions. This committee was established because the MDA crossed the boundary with another authority. In the beginning, there was 2 planning committees meeting together, which was a little clumsy, to say the least, and bad decisions were made. We had a number of years, and I think Councillor Cutler will also agree, that some of the development that was on the HBC side was called the Stalags because of their design. They are not very happy people that was originally moving into them. It was at this point that the joint committee was established. Meeting with HBC was effective. However, over the past 3 years, it has not sat
officers have been undertaking all decisions under delegated powers and has led to the breakdown in the cooperation and integration with the local community. The concern is, Chair, that the delegated powers, which need to be revised according to the MDA applications, all applications from the MDA should go through the Joint Planning Committee. This way, we're not having too much of a problem.
Councillor Reid, are you nearly finished because you are timed out?
I've got 3 more sentences to do. I won't remove the commas and things. Since September 22, I've been speaking about this problem with the leader of the council and the portfolio holder on the subject. They have said many, many times, it's not a problem. When we do the change of the constitution, we can make sure that that comes in.
We've looked back 17th of June 2014, 12th of March 2015. And then we had the last one was convened in 2021. We have 4, I don't know, Councillor Reid said we had 5 applications pending. I believe we've got 4 pending. And those again are waiting for that consultation process. But if, as again I'm told by our planning officers, if the parish council wanted to call those in, or okay, that's not the information I've been given.
Councillor Brooke, could you send in the minutes of the local parish council meeting so that we can cross-check this, please?
But this is, I mean, it is something that we can look to review as within the Constitution Working Party. We've had a look at the delegations to change those delegations. As they sit now, it's something that has to be done jointly between both authorities. We can't do that alone. So again, it is something that if we were minded to review as a committee, as a Constitution Working Party, again we can have a look at that further. But certainly the state of play at the moment in time is as I've detailed.
I think Councillor Cutler would like to say something.
Well, this has been an ongoing problem, and the planning department does seem to be very intransigent about this. I think it's about a very, very rigid interpretation of material planning considerations. It may be that we, as ward councillors and the parish council, have not been smart enough to put in very, very detailed material planning reasons for our objections, or for reasons for them to be called to committee. But there is a view that certainly with the major phases, there should be broader public discussion of it. I don't think every application within the MDA, because we are now getting applications for minor applications or individual householder applications, and those should be treated in the normal way. And it was never intended that they should go to the Joint Planning Committee. So saying all should go, but I think there are particular areas where, under the current approach, the calls for it to go to a Joint Planning Committee are being rejected, and there are certain areas that I'll give an example. In the future, the village centre or the town centre development there will be applications for it. We are trying, and I'd have another view when we talk about the forum, but there is a lot of work going on with cooperation with Havant in terms of Waterlooville town centre regeneration, the leisure centre, and aspects like that. It is crucial that the village centre is complementary to the regeneration of the town centre, that one doesn't do things to, so we need that public debate in a planning committee. Similarly, the applications for the town park, cross borders, and where they cross borders. I mean, I think part of the view of the planning department at the moment seems to be that actually they're not cross-border applications, so why bother? But in fact, we're trying to recognise through the forum as well that that MDA is part of Waterlooville. And so it's crucial that the interaction across that border is explored. So an application within Winchester for a major development, a major phase of the development, should perhaps be discussed jointly. And we have no clarity, because it's not a public meeting, that although officers say, yes, they talk to their Havant colleagues, we haven't heard from the Havant colleagues. We have no way of knowing what that joint approach is. And it seems to leave a deficit of public involvement there. So if we can find a mechanism, and I'm not sure that the terms of reference need to be changed particularly, but a mechanism where the interpretation is less rigid, I think that would go away to solve. I recognise there are resource issues, and we don't want joint planning committee meetings 4 times a year, but we do, all of us involved with that development, feel that there is a deficit there in terms of the major planning applications.
Thank you, Councillor Cutler. I think we'll return to this when we get to that section of Constitution, if that's all right with everybody. I'm sure we won't forget those points, and I'm sure we will be reminded if we do. Mrs. Evans, would you like us to take us through the major areas of the report? Would that work for you?
Yes.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans.
Thank you, Chair. We've already heard some of the detail and comments from our councillors with regard to some of the proposed changes. So I'm going to go through them, and I want to obviously focus on some of the fundamental changes. But one of the things I will say, and I think it's important to mention this now, because we did hear from a member of the public. We heard from Patrick, Mr. Davies. As I said at the beginning of this meeting, I started here as monitoring officer in January of this year. And I have to say that working here in Winchester, this council, the organisation, but also the administration, have fully embraces transparency and public participation in a way that I have not seen before. So it's hugely encouraging, and it is something that has been borne out in the Constitution Working Party, that is something that they have wanted to make sure we have clarity on that, and we've worked towards that. But I just think it's important for me to raise that now at the beginning. It did focus, and it came up in many of our conversations and many of our meetings. So I do want to focus on the fundamental bits, but there are also language changes that have been deliberately made and proposed by the Constitution Working Party in order to make things clearer for members of the public, and the language changes to make things more comprehensive and clear and understandable. So I'm going to go through the Part 2 interpretations. We did hear again from Patrick Davies that said about there was no definition of the informal working groups and what that means. And so we've updated language, and he's right, there isn't a definition in there. We can put one in. The use of informal working groups and informal meetings is standard. It's allowed within the law. It is something, again, here, as I started off by saying, we very much put as much as we can in public as possible here at this council. And we do briefings and we live stream our meetings when and whenever we can, or allow access to them. But working groups and informal meetings is part of local government. It's lawful. There is a place for that. We use that minimally here, but we can certainly add that to the interpretation. So if I'll try and address some of those questions that come up and have been mentioned when relevant, if that's okay, Chair. So in the interpretations, there's been language updates, and one of the important ones we chose, or it was proposed by the Constitution Working Party, to move from the word member. We found that in the current constitution we referred to members and councillors. We wanted to stick with one. We went with councillor because we believe that members of the public have a better idea of what that means, and so that has been used throughout the constitution. And we also changed the word citizens because people think of a British passport when they think of citizens, and we changed that to members. We proposed a change to members of the public. So that's something that is continues through the constitution. It was something that was picked up very, very early on. In our summary and explanation, part 1, we picked up the, corrections, typographical, language updates. The Constitution Working Party had asked for additional narrative regarding the historic nature of the city, and we've added that. So that's gone in, and I'm under very good authority that we've got that correct and it is accurate. We also added the wording to comply with the principles of good governance. So that's been put in. We felt that was important. And also there's an addition to the commitment by councillors to act in accordance to the Nolan principles and to maintain public confidence and ensure high standards. So that has been added also, that wasn't there before. Now the articles, we go on to the articles. These give the basic rules and a summary. And then we find more detail of the procedure within the parts of the Constitution. So our articles, most of them are minor language updates and typographical errors that have been corrected. Article 4 for the full council, this has already been mentioned by our councillors. The Constitution Working Party requested to make annual mandatory reports of representatives from those outside bodies, and in particular the Partnership for South Hampshire Push and South Downs National Park Authority was added. That's not an exhaustive list. That does allow for other representatives to bring their reports to full council as well. So that's been added. We did have discussion about, in Article 5, chairing of the council, and it was questioned. Again, we had lengthy discussions about many things, but the word efficiently is in our current constitution, and it was questioned whether that should be a word that is used when we talk about democracy and transparency. Should we measure that by efficiency terms? And so, as the Constitution Party were challenging throughout in a very, very good and the correct way to put your monitoring officer on the spot, they asked for the reason behind the wording, where that came in statute, and also where that recommendation has come from. So it did come from the Model Constitution of 2000, but it also comes from the Local Government Act, where we as a local authority need to secure continuous improvement in everything that we do, in having regards to a combination of economy, efficiency and effectiveness. So with that, we obviously stuck with the word efficiently, but we added effectively for completeness because we felt that was right. Article 6, the appointment of outside bodies has been omitted from our present constitution, so we've added that. And we also added a reference to the deputy leader acting on behalf of the leader in the leader's absence, because we don't have that in here at the moment. So that's been added for clarity. Article 7, this has already been mentioned by members, councillors this evening. Again, we've updated to reflect the current position of the committees, but the Constitution Working Party have proposed the addition of wording where the scrutiny committees will look to reference the forward plan. So we've added that wording, so it now reads scrutiny committee, which has a strategic outlook and solely holds the power of calling, having access to that forward plan. And we, again, that may come up in discussion during this meeting. And also we've heard about the additional wording, allowing me as a monitoring officer to have the discretion with regard to which committee or policy committee would be appropriate for those cross-cutting decision and policy making matters. Again, this will work in practice, as we've already heard. We will be holding regular meetings with myself, the chair of scrutiny, and the chairs of the policy committee collectively in order to agree those work programmes and make sure that we are putting them where we need them to go. So then going on to Article 10. The council has currently 3 area forums and they've been added, they've been put in the constitution. Conversations and negotiations are in place with regard to when they may discontinue. But what we wanted was clarity with regards to when that would be an appropriate time and when that appropriate time would be met. And so there's been an addition in the Constitution that the work will continue until it is considered that adequate and appropriate governance is in place. And again, allowing 6 months notice being given of any intention to disband any area committee. There's also within the same article reference to the town forum. This has been moved. It was slightly lower in that particular section. It's been moved up to the top and amended to clarify the role of the forum, its budgetary role, and the role it has as a consultative and advisory body. And so that's been amended to reflect that. There's also more detail with regard to how that works in practice, and that's found in part 3.3 that we will get to. So, Chair, I propose to just go through. There's only one more fundamental change within the Article 14, and then we maybe could pause and take any questions. So, Article 14 is our finance, contracts, and legal matters, and as Councillor Horrell has already mentioned, the Constitution Working Party had asked for clarity with regard to contracts under the value of £10,000. There wasn't anything detailed with regard to, did we need them? Was there a requirement for them to be in writing? And there was concern that that was being missed. And so I reported to the Constitution Working Party that all agreements were made verbally or otherwise under the value of 10,000. They have to be recorded by raising a purchase order that's subject to authorisation and is recorded. And all contracts over the value of £5,000 are recorded on a contracts register found on our website, and that's part of our public publication scheme, I should say. And we publish all expenditure over £500 as well. and I've reflected that in part 4.7 of the contract procedure rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Evans. Councillor Horrell also brought up the point about the code of conduct and the benefits of it being agreed before the end of this municipal year. I don't know if you'd like to tell the committee if that is possible.
So we did talk about that, and it is something that Caroline, Councillor Horrell has mentioned with our many one-to-ones as we meet on a regular basis. It is something that we have committed as the Constitution Working Party to work on in the new year, and it's something that I have done in 2 other authorities. Actually brought that forward. The reason for not bringing that in now, and there has been, I have been asked about that and questioned on that, is that what tends, how this generally works is that the principal authority, that's us, we adopt the model code, the new model code, the LGA's code. There is an advantage to waiting because the guidance has finally caught up with them, and with that it wasn't available for almost 2 years. We now have that guidance, and so it's very, very helpful with regard to interpreting and training, but also on how we go about assessing and determining the complaints that come in. So we now have that in place, and it adds to consistency and uniformity. But once the new code is adopted by the principal authority, which would be ourselves, it is then rolled out across the parishes, and we do the training at the same time as our own, and they follow on, in accordance with us as well. So again, across the parishes, when those complaints come in and training is given, it's consistent and we're all working on the same code. Now, there are some parish councils in my inquiries, as I've been round and visited many since I've been here, that have already adopted the code, so they've beaten us to it, but there are many others that will be adopting the code subsequently after we do, and so that is the plan. So as much as it will be great to get this review done, I am very, very committed to getting the model code through, and if we can do it, certainly we want to start in January. If we can do it, and it's a much smaller piece of work than this review, and you are very you're looking at one document, and it is a lot more easier to focus on. It shouldn't take too long, but I think that is something that is very, very possible. Yes, I do.
Thank you, Mrs Evans. I'm sorry, Councillor Horrell, we can't commit to a date, but you will be starting, no doubt, in January. Thank you. I think we'll go to questions on the report now. I know I have some on pages 97 to 112. Do we have any questions on Mrs Evans' report? Councillor Bolton.
Just really to go back to something that Councillor Horrell said as well, which is that we're being asked to recommend this constitution to go to full council, but there's still a lot of outstanding bits. Can you clarify for me what we will be recommending or asked to recommend, and what the next steps will be? Because it feels to me like this needs to sort of come back somewhere and circle back and be agreed finally before it then goes on to full council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Evans.
So, Chair, I've only gone through the fundamental changes in the articles as yet. There are fundamental changes within the parts that will make, I would imagine, more further discussion. But what we have to remember is that this is a light touch review. The Constitution, as already referred to by members this evening, it is a working document. It is something that needs to be reviewed on a regular basis. There are elements of work that one is the Model Code of Conduct that the Constitution Working Party will be committing to look at. And if there are any other elements here that this committee or even at full council feel that further work or review is needed, again, that is something that you would take and the Constitution Working Party would have a look at and report back to. And so it is, you know, the proposed changes are what's in here. There may be recommendations that stem from this meeting, where some, you know, suggested drafting may need to be put to full council. But generally speaking, it's what is here, and what is in this document, and what we may need to do is we may need to allow for certain parts of the Constitution to be looked at in more detail.
I share Councillor Bolton's concern about this. You've referred to the typographical changes and the numbering. Councillor Horrell referred to the hyperlinks, and I wouldn't want to be in full council recommending this report if I had not seen that assurance before it went to full council.
It is standard in any constitution review for what you have are the decision-making tools here in front of you. So you've got the drafting, and that is what this council needs and this committee needs to understand, but also agree and say that yes, that's what they recommend. With regard to formatting, hyperlinking, I completely understand you want a document that is going to work, but what you would always have is that you would always allow for that formatting, that hyperlinking, those grammatical. Even now we know there's a Her Majesty in this document, even though we changed, you know, I changed many of them myself. That type of typographical error and change, that is allowed now. I'm allowed to change that now without bringing that to full council. But I completely understand what you want is as best a document as you can see. The hyperlinking will not be able to, once we have the drafting set out, then IT with Modern Gov, which is how we are going to be viewing this, I believe, IT and the Democratic Services team will be working on how this document works. And before we press, you know, publish, that is something that this committee can see before we go live in January. But yes, you would always allow for the monitoring officer and for the Democratic Services team to do the work that they need to do. But as long as you're drafting and the intent is right, lawful and legal, then that is what you're being asked to agree.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans. Councillor Godfrey.
If I may follow up on that, is one of the weaknesses of the current versions, because there are multiple versions on the website, is that it's very difficult to follow your way around the Constitution and find anything. Can you assure us that either we'll have a single document which contains all 220 pages, which I'm very comfortable with because I don't print things out, and secondly, we'll have some way of searching the whole Constitution, not individual articles, so that we can find particular topics such as forum or referral or the like.
Thank you, Chair. That is a really, really good question, Councillor Godfrey, because as the monitoring officer, I'm the one who sits in the hotspots during your full council meetings. And one of the things that I need to be able to do is find the Constitution and the relevant bits when and as is necessary. And I have to say, I have really struggled since I've been here. So I've had a conversation with the IT team and with Democratic Services, and everything that you have asked for is what I have asked for, so that we have one document. We can word search if we need to. We will have an index that will be, I did have the technical term, I think, in my report, but it's user friendly, and you go to the index and you will be taken to that part of the document, and it will be one document. And again, hyperlinking within that document itself is something the Constitution Working Party that you were sat on did want as mandatory and as a very, as a requirement. And I agree with you. And I have been assured by our IT service lead that is something they can do for us.
And hopefully that the public word search on as well. I think that would be useful and only fair. Do I have any more questions on the covering report? I have. Oh, Councillor Gordon-Smith, did you? No. I was very interested, excited almost, to read on page 110 about the limit of 3 hours being an indicative term of meeting in the Constitution. I feel very strongly that we serve democracy better by having shorter meetings and possibly more concise speakers. I wonder why that did not find its way into the finished constitution.
Thank you, Chair. As I said, with regard to the changes, I've only gone through the articles at this moment in time. That does come and it is found under our council procedure rules, our council meeting rules, and that is something that, again, I can start going through the parts, or I can go straight to that particular part and go through where we got to and the discussions that were had with regard to the time limits, if that's helpful, Chair. Do that now.
What is the will of the committee? What do you like to? Councillor Gordon-Smith.
Yes, I would love to go through that. I think these very long meetings are really rather an ordeal, especially for people who have to get up very early the next day and take their kids to school. Not that that includes me, of course.
I'm really asking, Mrs. Evans.
Thank you, Chair. So I would have got to this, and this is found in part 4.1, council meeting, council procedure rules. We did, as has been alluded to by Councillor Godfrey, this did come up, and we spent a lot of time discussing whether we should have a time limit for our meetings, and also a time limit for all of our meetings, because what we were wanting to do was have clarity and consistency so that the rules would go throughout. Now, the Constitution Working Party had initially come up with a maximum meeting time of 5 hours. I had proposed a meeting time of 3 hours, which is, and I have to say this, it is the standard. I think you would probably find that 90% of councils, maybe even more than that, do set a 3 hour maximum as seen as being the correct balance for those attending meetings, their families or work or other commitments, and therefore they don't want a hugely late finishing time. That 3 hour, having said that 3 hour time limit is a point in time where you assess at the meeting whether you are going to continue. So it's not a guillotine. It is, what it does is it concentrates the mind at 3 hours. And then you have a look at, in practice, where I've been at other councils, you have a look at what business is left on the agenda and decide whether you are going to continue or not. So the Constitution Working Party did talk at length with regard to what was right, what seemed fair. And again, we had 5 hours, we had 3 hours. We haven't been able to come to a consensus. And so it's, again, the decision was taken that we would review that, the Constitution Working Party, and with a view to having a look at whether we are going to limit our meetings or not, or leave as it is.
Councillor Godfrey.
Madam Chairman, my recollection of a discussion is somewhat different in that the councillors present at that meeting did reach a consensus and decided on a watch check after 5 hours. We had discussed 3 hours, 5 hours, 4.5 hours, 5 hours with allowing more time to complete questions if that was required. A number of different options, but we came to a consensus of all the councillors agreeing on 5 hours. We also agreed that the meeting should start earlier, revert back to the same start time that all other meetings of the evening start at 6:30, so that we are less into the later hours with a 7 o'clock start. In addition, the challenge of having a limit means that you work towards that limit rather than dealing with matters in a prompt way. As you will know, as mayor, you can choose when to curtail discussion on a particular subject, to bring a meeting to an end. You have that power already and have always had that power. But some meetings do go on longer naturally. Some get dragged on despite themselves, and some just finish very early. The most recent council meeting we had, with virtually no items on the agenda, with one motion and a full set of questions, lasted 2 hours and 20 minutes. As soon as you introduce a single additional motion, a single additional referred minute, you'll have reached that 3 hour limit that you're suggesting. We don't know what the answer is, but during the extensive discussion, which we batted around, as Ms. Evans said, we saw different options. And I think it's would be much better to review how we can make our meetings more efficient than trying to impose a false barrier without also investigating those opportunities to improve our meetings.
Are we happy then, committee, that I'm sorry, Councillor Becker.
Sorry, I was just going to add a little bit more nuance on to what Councillor Godfrey said, which is correct. Just to add that a lot of this discussion was focused on the budget meeting and the length of the budget meeting. And we did discuss this before we went on to the proposals for how we can reduce the length of the budget meeting, which may or may not have affected the discussion on this particular point. Also, just to note, Councillor Tippett Cooper didn't agree with the 5 hour limit. I think he said 4 hours. So we didn't quite reach consensus on that, but a lot of that discussion was focused, almost entirely that discussion was focused on the budget meeting, which we all know has had a tendency to drag on. But I think, yeah, the intention is, if we can conduct meetings more efficiently, more effectively. I think the strong view is that we don't want meetings that go to 2 o'clock in the morning.
So members, are we happy to leave this to the working party to give further attention to meeting length and efficiency? Councillor Gordon.
Well, I think, yes, we do agree to that. But are we, when we say making meetings run more efficiently, I mean, that's rather a hostage to fortune there, aren't we, about how efficient we can make them? And will we be able to persuade people to, I mean, sometimes at meetings you can't tell whether it's a question or a statement or someone's reminiscences.
We look forward to a firm hand in the chairman of council meetings. I think we can all agree on that. I think we don't need to debate the covering report anymore. I'm sorry, I knew this was going to take a long time. Could we move on, please, to part 1, which is pages 113 to 127? I think we should get over those quite lightly. I don't think anybody has any questions on those. I beg your pardon? Pages 113 to 127.
You.
Councillor Bolton, please.
Thank you. So I was rather perplexed to see that a set of defined terms may be defined in a particular way and not are defined in a particular way. And that, to my mind, leaves too much ambiguity about interpretation. And I don't know that that's helpful in any document. On page 119, very top, the Constitution contains references which may be defined as follows. And then, you know, I mean, I look at this as a contract between us and the residents of the district. And therefore, all the defined terms would then be bold throughout the document so that you know, in that context, they will be defined in that way. So would someone mind explaining to me why it's been done this way and what the advantage of that would be, other than you can make up the definition as you go along?
Yes, Mrs. Evans would love to.
Yes, it's a really good question, actually. So it is language and wording that has come from the model code. And one of the reasons for that, and you're looking at it as a lawyer would, and rightfully so, with regard to definitions and how they are used. What you want to have in your constitution, I completely understand you need clarity. And you need it to be clear, but you will also always need a degree of flex and flexibility, so that there will be times when the definition isn't always as clear, and again how that is used within and how we interpret the Constitution. It's the monitoring officer that has to use it, but obviously, as you say, it's members of the public that need to understand it, and our councillors also. That is just the standard way of wording. So you don't necessarily tie everything down. You do as much as possible, and you refer to that throughout. But again, it is pretty standard.
Councillor Godfrey. I'm sorry, Councillor Bolton, yes, do carry on.
So, I mean, I've never been one to just do things because that's the way it's always been done. But I do think that I think it introduces an ambiguity within it that can be dealt with by better drafting, where a term is used that will have, in a particular context, that will have a different meaning. And I think this actually takes away some robustness from the Constitution that I think we could add back by being more tight about the wording. Thank you.
Could you propose a change, please, Councillor Bolton?
So, you know, I would suggest that it will have ramifications. If this has all been drafted with the view that it may be interpreted in that way, then to change that to contains references that will be defined as follows may have unintended consequences in the rest of the document that would need to be carefully worked through. And I know for a fact that one of those, which is member of the public, is defined later on in this document differently than it is within the definitions. So those things will have to be addressed. But at the top of page 119, I would suggest that that needs to say will be defined as follows. Thank you.
Would you be happy? No. Would you, Mrs Evans and Councillor Bolton, be happy with consideration should be given to changing that to will be?
We can certainly have a look at it. I can look at it. I mean,
given to that change.
The majority of the definitions are throughout. So that might be the only one.
The run on from that, of course, is that where a term is defined, it's then in bold, so you know it's reference to that particular definition, of course.
I mean, that's reflecting how you would draft a legal, you know, a contract as such. And what we didn't want this to do is look like a legal contract. We want it to be a working document that's accessible to everybody. But I take your point.
If consideration be given to that change, then, and I recognise that we recognise that it may cause difficulties elsewhere. That's okay. Godfrey.
Thank you. One specific definition which is on here, which I'm entirely happy with, which is exempt information, because that's important reference. We know what from this what exempt information is when we go into exempt session, and we have to remind ourselves very thoroughly. However, later in Article 4.4, exempt information is used in a different way, or an undefined way, which I would come to later or now.
Shall we try to take those out and those inconsistencies now? The page number for 4.4.
It is too is blurred. 272.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Godfrey. Let's just go to 272. I don't like inconsistencies. And neither do you, Mrs Evans. Always a cause of trouble. 272.
And it's 20, paragraph 22.5. And in that, the monitoring officer may withhold information from councillors that discloses exempt information. Now, we know that exempt information as defined in the glossary is not exempt from being seen by councillors. So I'm not sure what exempt information means here. I did ask this during the review and we never got to a satisfactory conclusion. I think we ought to use a different phrase in 22.5 so we understand the decision that the monitoring officer is making under what criteria, and not against is it exempt information as per the glossary. It's something else which is clearly defined.
An excellent point. Mrs Evans.
We did place underneath that. So 22.7, where there is uncertainty, the monitoring officer will determine what information can be assessed.
This is talking about the information available to any member of the council, and I think Councillor Godfrey and I can both remember a rather difficult session with Silver Hill when this became pertinent, and it does, as Councillor Godfrey says, it doesn't tie in with the definition of exempt in the earlier part of the document. So what other phrase could we use? There were quite special circumstances which we would both hope not to have repeated, I think. Do you have a view, Councillor Godfrey?
Well, if a councillor and the administration, the council, were at loggerheads over an issue, then there would therefore be justification for not sharing exempt information, whatever it is, with that council or any councillor. But there must be a way of it wasn't exempt from all councillors, it just from certain councillors in that particular case.
I think it might be better if Councillor Godfrey and I and Mrs. Evans took this offline, because it was very special circumstances, but I do think there is an ambiguity by using exempt in that part, and I think between us we can come up with a better phrase.
And I think it's also important that we make it easy for a decision to be made by the monitoring officer, saying this, it falls outside that and generally accepted term, but therefore you may not access it.
Is the committee happy that we try to find a better phrase there between Councillor Godfrey, myself and Mrs. Evans? Mrs. Evans, are you happy with that?
Yes, I think we can review the clauses. I mean, there are clauses underneath that deal with the type of information, but if we need to make that clearer up in 22.5, then yes, we can.
Thank you very much for that. Now, where's my list? I think we've finished with pages 129 to 142. Oh, haven't we got that far yet? I beg your pardon. So we've finished with pages 113 to 127. So we're moving on to articles 1 to 6, pages 129 to 142. Which again, I think are non-contentious, but
there's, although I'm not raising matters of typography and numbering, on page 135, section 402, I'm assuming, but I want to confirm it, that is meant to be followed by 3 subsections. And if that's correct, that's fine, as long as it's been amended to be the 3 subsections. So that the council is responsible for policy and budget framework, budget and housing land transfer. Yeah. Is that correct?
yes, that is correct and will be corrected in the next draft. And you will be vigilant, Councillor Godfrey. Thank you very much. Any other questions on this section going through to page 142? Are we happy to proceed? Councillor Bolton, thank you.
I don't know whether this is covered in a higher plane, for want of a better word, putting it, but in the on page 129, I sort of expected under the purpose of the constitution to talk about value for money, best value, that sort of thing. I wonder if that had been considered or not.
Mrs. Evans, best value? I think I've seen that somewhere else, but that actually comes under the audit and governance. Councillor Bolton, could you repeat the question, please?
So under the purpose of the constitution, when reading the list A to H and reflecting on that, I thought, where is value for money in that for residents? And then, you know, obviously best value is part of you know, one of the guiding lights of what we have to deliver. And I wonder whether there'd been any discussion or consideration for part of the purpose of the constitution is provide value for money, best value.
It is in our interpretation and our section of terms within the constitution, but yes, so all of the drafting with regard to best value, our decision making, transparency, is with that in mind, and that comes again from the 1999 Local Government Act in everything that we do. So it's all of our functions and all of our operations, and it's the constitution that details that. So yes, absolutely, yes it does.
So it doesn't need to be in there because it's on a higher plane with it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions going up to page 149? In that case, could I suggest we take an 8-minute break? We've been going for 2 hours, and I think we could all do with moving our legs about. Mrs. Graham, do you need to suspend the recording? Thank you, members. I've forgotten where we've got to. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. The Chair has given me the grace to go back to page 136 because it all ended in a bit of a sprint there, and I failed to sort of mention one point that I'm afraid utterly baffled me on page 136, which was under the functions of full council, point D. It's probably one of the longer sentences in the entire document, but by the end of it, I hadn't got the foggiest idea what it meant. And maybe if it could be reviewed or something like that, I'd be grateful and explain to me.
Councillor Bolton, would you be happy if we asked that sentence structure, that paragraph to be better structured? Yeah. So that's, I'm just trying to make a note. Nancy, have you got reference of that?
Thank you, Chair. We haven't made any changes to this, but we can certainly have a look at it. I think the Constitution Party probably did ask me to explain what it meant, but yes, we can make that clearer for sure.
Thank you very much, and Councillor Godfrey.
Going on, if I may, Madam Chairman, to page 143. Running away from what is it must be a Stephen Wetnell paragraph back there. In 143 701, there's a change there about the scrutiny. Holds of power call in having access to the key decision for a plan. Now, we had a long discussion about this on the review, and I would put it worth just airing just to make sure I understood and others understood what the implications of this are. Now, we talked about the possibility of having a scrutiny committee and meet before a week before every cabinet meeting, and other unfortunate suggestions like that. But the idea was to try to make sure that none of the key decisions slipped through the gap and weren't didn't have the opportunity to be considered by scrutiny. The changes you put in are very simple, short. How will that achieve a beneficial change, and what beneficial change will it achieve?
So, Councillor Godfrey, do you mean the addition of having access to the key decision for a plan, or do you mean the part that talks about my discretion?
Certainly, the short half sentence is pithy and very exciting. I'm not quite sure how that delivers benefit, but if it is developed by the larger paragraph, then that's great. But what do you see as changing for scrutiny to achieve what the review group were trying to achieve?
So what we talked about, and as you've already mentioned, we did discuss this at length in our Constitution Working Party, and I think it came up in many of our meetings. What concerns were raised with regard to being able to see the forward plan and seeing what key decisions were coming up and having access to that early enough. And there was an occasion mentioned where the forward plan didn't make it to scrutiny when we would have liked to. So obviously that was an error, and apologies were made for that. But we discussed what would be helpful with regard to the forward plan, and I think I took my lawyer's seat and said, well, statutory provision is that we have a forward plan that reflects and shows 28 days. That's what by law we have to. And I remember the Constitution Party members saying that's not necessarily, early enough. And also what we wanted to do was make sure the discretion that I've added was that we would work out, we'd reference the forward plan, and I would be party to working out where those overlapping decisions should go, and matters should go. So at the time, we looked at the terms of reference of the open scrutiny, and I asked where there was a deficit, where you felt there might be a deficit, and we looked at seeing things, pre-scrutiny, post-scrutiny, and how that works. And I believe that in me facilitating the pre-decision and those overlapping jurisdictions early on, and working out where they're going to go, that will certainly help. What we did also discuss was whether that 28-day forward plan that you see helps and facilitates that. I did talk about what other councils do, and that we would have a look and see if it might be that you see more. We did talk about the earlier, if you see more than 1 month and you see 2, 3 months maybe, the forward plan is work in progress, and will always be a caveat that it may change. But again, that is something that we can have a look at here. Are we suggesting that a 3-month forward plan would be more helpful to facilitate this? And in order to again work out where those matters and which policy committee they may need to go, and whether scrutiny needs to see them. So that is something that we did discuss, and that is something that I'm open for discussion here. In having access to the key decision forward plan, is it a forward plan that you are, as talked about in the Constitution Working Party, you're expecting to see in advance of more months?
Thank you, Mrs. Evans. This relates to a point I wanted to bring up further on, where the decision is made as to which committee a matter should go to. I didn't feel that the 28 days forward plan gave a window to see what was coming and plan those committee meetings in order to cover the subject matter in the best possible way. So I felt that a 28-day of firm data and a couple of months of potential would be more beneficial both to you and to democratic services. But I'd like to take views from floor, please, if I may.
Well, the problem with trying to increase the 28-day notice is it's hard enough to get the forward plan key decisions together for 28 days prior notice, let alone try and do it in any semblance of reality earlier than that, I suspect. So I think we have to think what the forward plan is for, and that's to publicise these important decisions that have to be made public, as Mr. Davis would expect. But perhaps we need to back it up with a clearer schedule of activity. which the particular policy decision committees would find useful, I suspect, to help a very good job they're doing in helping policy move forward. That should be flowing out of the council plan, but maybe more difficult. Yeah.
Is there any other appetite for asking this to be reviewed? Because I'm not willing to give people work if it's not going to deliver a tangible benefit. Councillor Gordon-Smith?
Well, I think making for more efficient working would be a very tangible benefit, would it?
But I'd like the view of officers on that, please, if you could.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things that I did commit to when we were discussing this at the Constitution Working Party is, again, looking at the diarised and calendar of meetings, because that was picked up that it hadn't necessarily worked recently. And I've had a calendar of suggested meetings already sent to me. And I did commit to the Constitution Working Party that we would look in detail to see where those sit and where those will lie in order to facilitate, having a look at key decisions coming up in advance. And we did discuss previously that, again, with these policy committees, I will be having those regular meetings as well with the Chair of Scrutiny to work out, where some of these cross-cutting decisions or matters will be going and when and where. So we'll have the work programme hopefully worked out in advance in order to facilitate this.
So there is no need for it to be in the public domain, is what I take from that, Mrs. Evans. How do we feel about no further action on this?
If I may, on a forward plan itself and developing its purpose, I think that's, I understand that, and I don't think I would support trying to publish something which can't be. But tying in the scrutiny programme with work which is coming up a bit more closely, which I took to be the interpretation of the CWP's wishes or intentions with that half a sentence. How that will be done, I think, needs to be developed, not necessarily in the Constitution, but as a practice.
So we're happy to leave that to officers to develop, create the process to ensure sound planning of meetings. Are we happy with that? Thank you, members. Anything else before page 149? No, moving on to pages 151 to 152, which is the area committee and fora. Now, we've heard that process appears not to be being followed, which is not a matter for the Constitution. It is a matter for the Cabinet, quite frankly, if processes are not being followed. And I would expect that to be taken there and brought to their attention and the matter to be resolved. Is there anything in Article 10 that we need to look at changes as a change to the Constitution? Councillor Godfrey.
Councillor Reid made a strong case to bring consistency to these informal gatherings, which are what these forums are. And I refer to Winchester Town Forum in that same way, because it's not a one thing or the other. But they all serve a useful purpose at the moment. So introducing the sunset clause is a useful idea, because they may not serve a useful purpose going forward. But it would help reduce any confusion if we set up any forums we set up, use the same rules of engagement. Town forum is made up of all the members representing the wards that the town forum affects. I suggest that all forums should follow that same rule, and that should be in the constitution as a starting point.
Councillor Becker.
Thank you. As former chair of the town forum, I have to say it's not an informal gathering. It is a formally constituted committee of this council. It has budget setting authority, makes recommendations to the cabinet for the precept for the town. It's not a development area. It's an area that has already been developed over 1,000 years. So it is different. It is a different beast to the development for it. I don't think it, sorry, I used the word for it. I don't think it ought to be included within the same rules and be subject to the same rules and the same sunset clauses as the other forum, because it is not a development forum. It is the town forum, and ultimately fulfills the role of the parish council for the town, because we'd have no other elected representatives in the town.
Are we happy to move on? I think this will come up later when we get to around about pages 218. So let's move on. We may have to come back to this, I think. Any other questions on pages 151 to 152? No, and then pages 153 to 167, please. Oh, sorry, Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. So page 159, principles of decision making. Is this another section that's sort of come over from the model constitution? Because I thought it was the strangest combination of, you see, the thing for me is I'm reading it for the first time. So I you know, funnily enough, I didn't sit down and wrap a wet towel around my head when I first got elected the year before and went through every word of it. But this time I have. And when you read it afresh, you sort of look at it and think, that is an odd combination of principles of decision making. And there's nothing about, you know, a favourite one of the two, Neil's, risk and the impact of, you know, risk on the decision making. There's nothing about timeliness, short and long term perspectives in decision making. You know, it's and you know, natural justice, you know, could have been more like act fairly in an unbiased way or something. So I just wondered whether there was any consideration or thought about bringing these into the 21st century a little bit. Thank you.
Again, this is language used from the model code. So the yellow and the highlighted parts are our additions. And again, a lot of this comes from not just the model code, but it's come from guidance from central government. And these are, if you, again, I'm not excusing them, but it is standard language that if you were to look at any of the council's constitution, these are, you know, the true principles of decision making, and that is how they are described and understood.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans. I think yes, there's quite a lot of less than transparent language, but we have to take what we're given. I don't think we have any more questions going up to page 167. In which case I shall ask Mrs. Evans to take us through the substance of the changes after that page. Would you like to take that, Mrs. Evans? Are you?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And again, as I said before, as we go through some of the parts, it might bring out some of the further discussion. But obviously I'll be guided by you, Chair. So we, again, going through the fundamental changes and realising that we're probably going to hit the 3-hour limit that had been suggested in this review. So I'm just having a look. We're part 3.1. There are no changes, fundamental changes for me to comment on. Part 3.2, the Cabinet, its committees and Cabinet member structure. We've had a language update, but the Cabinet committees and the terms of reference have been added because they've been admitted to our present constitution. The other, so the major changes there are that the matters referred to Cabinet from the Cabinet Committee Housing, they have been changed, and this now includes the approving of the annual business plan for the wholly owned housing company and any other shareholder agreement reserve matter decision. And we've also got the addition of the monitoring officers, my discretion being used to determine which of the overview and scrutiny committees or Cabinet committees are appropriate for pre-scrutiny and decision-making purposes. And we've already addressed that when we went through the articles before.
Chair, would you like to continue? Or
I don't know whether you want to take any questions as we go through. That might be easier than going back again. But again, I'll be guided by you.
I think we'll make sure there are no questions on pages 169 to 216. Councillor Godfrey, thank you.
Thank you. 195. The subsection D, and Evans referred to this earlier about the Winchester Town Forum. This seems very clear, but I wonder what matters the Town Forum might be consulted on, which aren't planning or licensing in regular feature.
Councillor Becker, would you like to take that one?
Thank you. Again, wearing my previous hat. Often these things are things like bin collections, like the recycling survey that's currently doing the rounds very well online. When there is a briefing about changes to recycling, often in the past, officers were very keen to go along to parish councils and update parish councils on what the plans were. Yet the poor Town Forum had no update and no newsletters being sent. So it's really everything. It's all of the things that parish councils get briefed on by the council that the Town Forum tended in the past to be forgotten a little. So it's to address that deficit. So recycling, for example, bin collections. Think of another example, planning policy rather than planning decisions. That's the local plan. We had to, that was actually one of the specific examples, again, where parishes were consulted and they had briefings, and the Town Forum didn't receive any briefing from relevant officers. So it's just to address that and to make that clear on the face of the Constitution that officers actually do need to also talk to the Town Forum.
Thank you, Councillor, and Councillor Godfrey again. Thank you.
Thank you. Page 196, this joint committee. Again, we heard from the Denby Double Act about the concern over the significant applications not being passed to the joint committee. How can the Constitution be amended to ensure that applications do get passed? Significant MDA applications do get determined by the appropriate planning committee.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Godfrey. I think I mentioned previously that with regard to making changes to the functions that have been delegated to this joint committee, it would need to be matters would need to be discussed and agreed by both parties. So that would be the other authority. My understanding is, and as I've already spoken and addressed, again, it's information that has been given to me by officers. I'm not convinced that it is the Constitution that needs changing. I think it is using, and again, this is something that we will address at member briefing with regard to how you can call things to committee. And again, this is something that has been brought up at an executive leadership level and an operational level, and it's something that we can ensure we can give the correct information, how we can get things to come before committee and make sure that those are used correctly, and make sure, and obviously keep and be mindful of making sure that this is working as it should be. I mean, the information I've been given from officers, I cannot see that things haven't been going there when asked. I looked at, I've been given information here with regards to the parish council. When they have called things in, the information I've been given is that they've then been satisfied by officers' feedback and withdrawn that. So again, it's I'm not convinced that officers have been turning a blind eye to parish councils and not been listening. But again, that is something that now has been, we've looked at as part of this review, and I will continue as monitoring officer, but also the executive leadership board will be making sure that these committees and the committees are being used correctly. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Chamberlain, please.
Thank you, Chair. In many ways, Councillors Brooke Reed and Godfrey have beaten me all to the point, but I think I would only add that surely the point is where there is a concern against, or material concern against planning policy, whether that be by a parish council or a group of residents, then it should be coming to exactly this type of forum to be heard and discussed. As a matter of principle. So I'm inclined to agree. I think it was Councillor Cutler who said earlier on that there's not a material change to the Constitution. It's evident, but there's clearly something that we need to look at in terms of how it's being acted on the ground.
Very much. Any other questions before page 216? Anything else? In that case, we will move on to page 207. Oh, I beg your pardon, Councillor.
I'm going on to 217.
Would you like to go forward?
Thank you.
Councillor Godfrey.
I'm assuming what we can delete pages 216 to 220, because this has all been subsumed into the rules of procedure.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Pages 216 to 220. It seems to be a part of a draft which is no longer relevant.
Thank you, Chair. We've already moved on to, and I'm not going to take us back there, the part 3.3 regulatory committees. We've discussed the town forum and also the joint planning committee. We would then have part 3.4 scheme of delegation to officers. That's clearer and more concise and easier to follow now. Part 4.1, which is the relevant part.
I think we're somewhere else. Councillor Godfrey.
I'm just
page 217.
Yeah.
Edit Budget Council meeting procedure.
Oh. Thank you. I'm just getting there. So what I wanted to do was just go through the parts and get us up to speed, Chair, as to where we are and where Councillor Godfrey has moved us on to. So you're talking about pages within part 4.1, our council meeting procedure rules, and you are questioning why the budget paper is there. The procedure paper is there, and that it will be deleted. So yes, if I'd have already covered that part, that was a budget paper that was put forward and was rejected by the Constitution Working Party. Some elements of that procedure, it was a standalone document, some elements of that procedure have been added to the procedure budget meeting, and the details of that. So yes, your question, that will be removed. That's only in there, and the report deals with the fact that that has been rejected. So the distinctions and the amendments that are before you now are that we have added a distinction between an alternative budget and amendment to a budget and what that means. We have also added where an alternative budget is being proposed, the proposing group or councillor must have secured confirmation of the 151 officer that this alternative budget meets the statutory requirements and that the alternative budget proposed is deliverable. This must be confirmed within sufficient time to allow for 6 clear days prior to the budget meeting. So that's been proposed, that's what's drafted. The other amendment is that a proposed alternative budget for consideration at full council will be published 48 hours prior to the budget meeting. So that's been added. And those are the only changes. Shall I go on with regard to the other council procedure rules, or did you want to take any questions with regard to that budget?
I have a question on the budget, but I'm happy for other councillors to go first.
But 217 to 220 will be removed in its entirety.
Yeah.
That's fine. It's tidying up. That's all. Thank you.
Unfortunately, one of my questions was on 218. I was intrigued by a one-line budget amendment that didn't impact another line in the budget. In my experience, either there's a reduction in expenditure elsewhere or an increase in income. I don't know if you could cover that, Mrs. Keys. It is getting late.
Yes, I'm happy to. We refer to an amendment being a single item, so a single change, omission or addition. Clearly, if you are saying you want to amend a budget to spend more money somewhere else, you would have to reduce a budget elsewhere to fund that. So one amendment would not necessarily be against a single budget line. It would have an effect elsewhere.
So there would in effect be 2 amendments, but that would be the limit of the one-line amendment. Thank you.
Yeah.
So which pages should we be looking at if those pages have been deleted?
So, Chair, you would start with regard to procedure rules that are relevant to the budget. You would be looking at, let me take you to the right pages.
So would that be pages 221 to 242?
Yes, I think you're there before me. Yes, that's right. 241 and page 242.
Questions,
Thank
please,
you, Chair.
councillors. Councillor Godfrey.
Page 227. Section 8.4C. I know this has been here present previously, but it's a point which I shared concerns with Councillor Wallace, which he raised. Where there is no business requiring council approval, a referred minute, then meetings have been cancelled. And that's what happened in July this year, leaving a very long period of time without backbenchers being able to be engaged in any way with the council. I think it's we should be looking at ways not to cancel planned meetings or move them. Except in the event of an emergency. But there's always administrative or backbencher business to be performed. And I think that it should only be in the event of an emergency.
I'm very aware that there is a significant cost to a full council meeting. And I wonder, Mrs. Keys, if you could give us an indication of that. Is that a fair question? No, it's not a fair question. I wonder if there are other ways in which those backbenchers can be challenging the decisions being made and the papers being reviewed. And we've got a very good example with Councillor Wallace, or in fact, both of our Green councillors, where up until now they've not had positions on committees, yet they have both been very active in speaking at policy meetings, at cabinet meetings, and they are very much challenging the administration. And so I think there is some conflict with what we're saying there, Councillor Godfrey.
He's the one who said it, and I agree with it. So I think that leaving a 7 month, not is 9 months, gap between council meetings did leave a hole in the municipal year, which I think is much to be regretted.
Councillor Bolton, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I absolutely agree with Councillor Wallace and Councillor Godfrey on this point. I think that, as they both have said, actually, that if we are properly hearing back from a lot of the members that represent our interests on other bodies like South Downs National Park, if we use them correctly and they give us feedback on what they've been doing to the full council, I think that's the forum in which we're able to cross-examine them about what's going on other bodies that we have our fingers within the pies of. And I think that I'm sure there is a cost, and I'm sure it's not minor, but it is part of a live democracy that we convene these forums so that we can scrutinise one another about the decisions and the involvement that we have in other bodies. So I would wholeheartedly support what they say about making sure that we have those meetings.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Councillor Becker.
Thank you. I would support what Councillor Bolton has said about the report back. That does increase the amount of business that the full council will be expected to conduct, and so there will be fewer opportunities to cancel full council meetings, because those updates will have to be included on the agenda. But also to note that one of the other changes that we have made to this constitution, which we will get to, is to bake in the right of councillors and the public to speak at cabinet meetings. That's always been the practice, but it hasn't actually been set out in the constitution before. So that's another change that has come about. So there will always be that opportunity for backbenchers to come and hold the cabinet to account, not just through council questions at the end of full council meetings.
Mrs. Evans,
thank you. I just wanted to say, Chair, that the decision to cancel any meeting of the council or any of its committees is taken very, very carefully, and it isn't something that the decision is made lightly. What we do need to be mindful of is the purpose of the main purpose of full council meeting is to conduct business. And there will always be criticism, particularly in a district like ours, where our councillors come in from, far and wide places, with regard to convening a meeting and paying expenses for members to get to a full council chamber. And there'd be very little or no business to conduct. But as Councillor Becker has already said, there some of the changes in the constitution will be allowing for more business, and therefore we will need the meetings to be convened, and there will be more business on those agendas. Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Becker, I find you usually have a constructive suggestion in this area. Would you like to propose a change to 8.4? No, you won't be able to. No. How should we take this forward, committee? Councillor Russell Gordon.
Sorry. So what's being suggested is that we have a full council meeting to listen to reports from members who've been to outside, members going to outside committees.
So is our decision, is our recommendation that we actually don't believe that this will occur in future? Councillor Bolton.
I mean, if you're after a recommendation, I would just say after the word emergency in C, full stop.
But to convene a meeting where there is no business for the council,
it's not that it's. I think to forgive me for putting words in your mouth. If I do so, then correct me. But I think what we're saying is that by introducing the other aspects of reporting back of what councillors are involved in other bodies and debating some of the issues within that there will be more information and more there'll be more throughput within the actual council meetings. And we're not talking about actually increasing the number of meetings. We're talking about actually making them effective. And there should be decisions brought to these council meetings. I don't understand why, one should be cancelled. We don't have that many. So what is going on in Winchester if we feel the need to abandon a council meeting when there's, what, 4?
Councillor Cutler, thank you.
One of the things we need to remember is that this constitution, when it was enacted in 2019, actually reduced the amount of things that had to go to council. It significantly reduced the amount of decisions that needed to be taken by full council, and that has led to this situation. So, whether that was right or wrong, probably from an efficiency point of view, it was the right thing to do. It was the previous administration agreed that it was the right thing to do. That has given rise to the occasion that very occasionally there is no formal business that has to go to council. I think the question about whether or not to amend this, in a way, on the one hand, we're talking about, yes, there are now more things to report. Therefore, left alone, it's less likely that a council meeting will be cancelled. But what if you take that away, then there may be circumstances where it's just not. I think the July one's the problem, oddly enough, because if you'd had one in July, you're going to have one in September and November. And if you miss the September one, it's not the end of the world. Do you know what I mean? It's just that July one that leaves that long gap between a formal meeting in February through to September. Is that likely to happen again? But the point is, actually, will there be reports for push and the South Downs National Park? If you've only appointed someone to those roles in May, will they have anything to report in July? So you still may end up with this fairly pointless meeting in July. That I think is the problem, unless there's actually business that under the Constitution has to go to council. Now, there have been occasions, not very often, where Cabinet has chosen to take a decision to council that they didn't have to under the Constitution. Appointment of the development partner, I think, was one of those. But decided that it was an important enough decision that it should go to council, even though the constitution didn't form it to. But it's very difficult to tie these things down. So taking it out might lead to a very unnecessary council at the wrong time of the year. You know, sort of November, when you don't really need it because you've already had one in September and you're going to have one in January. So my personal view would be to not take it out. It's at the discretion of the mayor in the first place. The possibility of extra things, we've increased the likelihood of things going to council. I'm not sure if it's entirely necessary to take it out. That's a view.
Just if, sorry.
Councillor Godfrey was before you.
Yeah, if I may suggest then that we move on and ask the monitoring officer to feed back to both the cabinet and to the chief executive on the difficulties of cancelling a council meeting, but also on the timing of council meetings. If the July one is increasingly difficult to put an agenda to, then perhaps we ought to be having planned ones at different times of the year, rather than cancelling planned events.
Thank you, Councillor Godfrey and Councillor Bolton.
Okay, one last point. It's just the element of restricting the number of opportunities for a backbencher to bring motions and that sort of thing that they feel strongly about is then reduced. That would be the end of the point for me. Thank you.
Are we happy to move on this? Sorry, Mrs. Evans.
I just wanted to say that it would be very difficult to remove as was suggested, where there is no business requiring council approval. If we have in our definition best value, we talk about efficiency and that isn't everything that we do. So to not have that provision could be it contradicts, and I would not be suggesting that, but certainly with a view to that July meeting, whether it needs to be later in July maybe, or just having a look at when the meetings happen and when they are placed, we can certainly have a look at that. And I think certainly the leader, the chief executive and myself as the monitoring officer are aware that there was discontent with regard to the cancellation of that meeting. And as I've already said, it's not taken lightly, and hopefully it will not have to happen in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans. Is there anything else that we need to look at in the Constitution? I think we have covered. Councillor Godfrey.
Yeah, if we can go on to page 242. There's 100 pages left of this Constitution.
Has identified a bit that we should look at before that, if you don't mind, Councillor Godfrey.
So, thank you, Chair. It was just with regard to, again, the changes in the council meeting procedure rules. We talked about the budget. We did brush over this, but I don't know whether a consensus was agreed. The starting time. So we talked about the limit, and again, we're going to leave that for now. But we have an amendment in here that full council meetings will start at 6:30 instead of the 7 p.m. as they are currently. So just to flag that to the committee.
Do we have any views on that? Councillor Chamberlain, thank you.
Not a hugely strong view, but I would just note that we've just mentioned, members who travel from, far-flung places in the district to get here, who may have working days, whilst it may be beneficial for some, I'll just venture maybe not for all, but there is no, right size fits all answer, I suggest.
I do have some concern about those that have a 40-minute journey into Winchester from the far-flung corners. Especially if a meeting is going to go on for 5 hours, and we're not allowed to eat in the chamber, as we are up at Hampshire County Council. Councillor Cutler, do you have a view on this?
I don't, partly because I'm not in a position where, you know, I have a working day that is fixed. If I did, I might have a view. I do remember Councillor Gemmell for many years complaining about meetings being held too early. And she didn't have as far to come as I did, but was in one of the southern parishes and had a job. And I think there is an element of it that but I mean, because the reality is all our other meetings are at 6:30, so really why make an exception for council? And I think that's really the for me, I don't see any point in making an exception for council, quite frankly.
Thank you. I think we'll just leave that as is then, and we will obviously review it if it causes problems. Thank you. Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you. My first point's on page 234, section 1614, 1615. I welcome the changes to the written answers section to bring the public and the councillors back into a largely similar process. I think we're looking at what's presented. Couldn't we find a way to bring the members of the public into lockstep with the councillors, which would have the written answers published 2 hours before the meeting, and that the member of the public then only asks the supplementary question, rather than this very staged reading out the question which we all had printed, and the chief executive, the cabinet member reading out the answer which they had to print out and which is going to be published. Wouldn't it be easier to print those out, publish those, and then go straight to the supplementary? A simple way to reduce the amount of time in council.
What an excellent suggestion.
Councillor Godfrey, can I just ask you to confirm, was that for councillors, did you say? Or
Yeah, for members of the public, so we do things in the same way. Did you say a paragraph from the constitution as well? That's it.
Could we ask?
Or go the other way. Yeah. What's the point of that? Yeah.
Councillor Cutler, I think you're pushing it. I think that's an excellent suggestion.
On that point, though, there is a benefit if someone is listening along online. For their benefit, they don't have that. They may not have that printed answer in front of them. So suddenly, the councillor is asking a question, asking a supplementary to which no answer to them has been given. So I wouldn't dismiss it completely out of hand. But
I think this is a consideration being given to.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Because they are published on the website, aren't they?
Yes.
Both the public questions and the.
Yeah, would there not be logistic problems with getting them to the members of the public? You know, who may not be, I mean, we all check our emails and all the rest of it and pick up on things, but now a member of the public may not be so au fait with the whole process.
Could I suggest that we ask that consideration be given to the same procedure being used for questions to the members of the public as from councillors? Happy?
Thank you.
Councillor Godfrey.
This is page 242, section 20.4, top of the page. This is a change which we discussed in the in the CWB to look at how we can bring forward the discussion and visibility of alternative budgets. Having presented budgets for the last 15 years, I'm more than happy to do this. What I'm keen to do, though, is if we're putting up forward an alternative budget, i.e. an amendment to the budget, but we get to see the budget before we put in the amendment. Now, 6 days prior to the meeting is a day before the agenda is published. I'm not sure that's possible. No, irrelevant. You're being asked to make an amendment to a paper which hasn't been published. So there's a bit of awkwardness. On top of that, the time to prepare a formal submission to the 151 officer to show what our workings has to be done after the decision at Cabinet's been done. Even if we did follow on from there, we only have about 3 days preparation time, which is not a massive amount. So I'm just wondering why that figure of 6 days is so important. And if it is, then perhaps we have to require the preceding meetings, the cabinet meeting, to go back or go earlier, so that there is sufficient time for consideration by the 151 officer for an alternative.
So we have scrutiny, sorry, we have cabinet that approves the budget with the advice of the section 151. We then have how many days before it's published for? It sounds like there's enough time to me, but
The council publication, so this coming year, the date, I believe it's the 8th of February is the cabinet meeting. And to celebrate my birthday, 22nd is the council meeting. The 6 days is the 14th of February. When we would have to have the alternative budget in, assuming it's not 6 full working days before the day of a meeting. Therefore, there's only 3 working days after cabinet, assuming that the details of the budget are not amended at cabinet, which is very rare, but can happen.
Thank you, Chair. The cabinet papers are published 1 week prior to the 8th of February, so that was actually in the detail of that is available 1 week before. So there is considerable time.
well, they can change it, but they rarely do. There's an extensive debate before we get to the cabinet meeting to approve the budget.
So the alternative budget is squeezed in between. Is that going to be a reasonable timescale? It doesn't seem reasonable, as strictly it is an amendment to a paper which hasn't been published. Yeah, can I suggest we look at a shorter period for a final submission to the 151 officer? Obviously, we will have been in discussion for some months before.
Mrs. Keys.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as Councillor Godfrey says, an alternative budget, we're talking about multiple amendments, and it takes some time to work that up, and the process would have started several months before the budget meeting itself. Obviously, an indication of the basis of the budget and the formation of that is given within the medium-term financial strategy, and then as Mrs. Evans has said, the papers with the detailed budget would be produced for the scrutiny meet, would be published for the scrutiny meeting first, followed by the cabinet meeting. So whilst there could be changes to that budget before the papers are published for council, I think given the nature of the kind of changes which might want to be suggested in an alternative budget, enough would be known at that stage to be able to produce detailed workings.
That does sound sensible to me. There are quite a few. It is published at least 3 weeks before, isn't it, to go to scrutiny, where it does get a good going over. Any other thoughts on that? Councillor Godfrey.
The wording in that's the last sentence in 20.4. Can I suggest that we change the first phrase to
Councillor Godfrey, I lost the place you gave us.
Okay, it's 20.4, the end of 20.4 on page 242. Can I suggest this should be read, this must be submitted to the section 151 officer 6 clear days prior to the budget meeting? Because I'm not sure I understand what the other words mean.
Mrs. Keys, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So at the beginning of paragraph 20.4, it talks about proposing group or councillor securing confirmation from the section 151 officer, and then it says it goes on to suggest that this must be confirmed 6 clear days. If an alternative budget were to be presented to me 6 clear days before, I might not necessarily have time to review all of the detail in that to be able to say whether it met the legal requirements for a balanced budget. So it's looking for me to be able to confirm that 6 days before the council meeting, rather than it be presented to me for an initial first assessment 6 working days before.
Thank you, Mrs. Keys.
I'm having not discussed this period at all in CWP. I'm afraid I am struggling to understand what the logic is of submitting an amendment earlier and earlier in the process to achieve sign off from a section 151 officer. Either takes 6 days or it takes a longer period of 6 days. And that's not at all clear in this this section, which it is.
Councillor Becker, thank you.
Thank you. Part of the reason for this, Councillor Godfrey, you recall, was from Councillor Wallace expressing his difficulty in receiving a budget on the night and not being able to have time to understand it, to digest its implications, and to possibly support aspects of it. So this clear 6 days was to also give the 151 officer sufficient time to be able to brief various groups about the implications of the budget, how it is intended to work, and for the opposition groups to understand, or for everyone to understand the implications of the alternative budgets being put forward, so they can be properly considered rather than sprung on you at the last minute, as has happened previously. So the 6 clear days is also to give Mrs. Keys sufficient time to be able to talk to who she needs to talk to about the alternative budgets and their implications.
And of course, we're also missing out the vital step of scrutiny, looking at that budget, which is unfortunate. So there we are. I dare say. Mrs Evans, did you want to add?
I was just going to pick up on exactly what Councillor Becker has said, and just confirm that we're only talking about 6 clear days prior notice on an alternative budget and not an amendment. Just making that point clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs Evans.
I haven't had the answer to my question.
Which question?
So what's on the, in here is a very unclear statement in set 20.4, which says that something has to be confirmed within sufficient time to allow 6 clear days prior to a budget meeting. So the alternative budget, which is an amendment to the budget, has to be submitted to the section 151 officer 6 days before or more than 6 days before.
Mrs Keys.
You need to have secured confirmation from the section 151 officer 6 clear days before the budget meeting.
What's that mean? How long do you take to secure? How long do you take to secure? For me to secure from you? If you require 10 days, then that's what the Constitution should say.
Mrs Keys, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it would depend on how wide-reaching and complicated the alternative budget was, how many amendments it was made up from. So the onus is to work with the section 151 officer and my team with sufficient time for me to be able to give that confirmation that it's a legal, balanced budget and it's achievable with 6 working days before the council meeting. If the proposals weren't given to me until 6 working days before the meeting, if it were a complicated alternative budget with multiple amendments and very wide-reaching implications, then I may not be in a position to be able to provide the proposer of the alternative budget with my confirmation.
Then, Madam Chairman, I'm struggling to understand what the 6 days is for. We have the 48 hours for publication, so people can, other councillors can understand what's going on. And then there's a period between 6 days and the 48 hours for the preparation for briefing materials. It's not allowed to be discussed with anyone outside the officers' circle. So what is that 6 days for that we have to be to hit? Given that we've also got a period before that of unspecified period in which we then have to negotiate acceptance.
Mrs Keys, thank you.
Chair, I think it would be very difficult for me to be able to tell you how many days I need with my team to be able to go through the detail of any proposed alternative budget and the amendments therein. So rather than give a deadline for giving the information to me, it's giving a deadline for when we need to have worked through the information in order for me to give that confirmation.
So it's the clarification of detail before the finance department start work on that alternative. I find that quite clear. Absolutely.
It may be clear, and it is. I understand that period prior to the 6 days. What I then don't understand is what happens between 6 days and the 48 hours when it's published, and why we lose that time in the process.
I understood you to say, Mrs Keys, that would be for briefing the administration. $48 hours.
The 48, so sorry, I misspoke. It was 48. So Mrs Keys would have the 48 hours before the meeting to brief. But I imagine if there are 2 alternative budgets, you will need time to prepare those briefings and to prepare the material for for that. Also, considering that you will also have to look at amendments and other issues that may be coming forward. So, and that the time before the budget meeting is probably your busiest time of year.
Do you wish to add anything, Mrs. Keys? I think not. I'm satisfied. Is everybody else satisfied that we have?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, no, it's just that it then puts Mrs. Keys under pressure with only 4 days to prepare things for publication 48 hours before the actual budget meeting. And this doesn't seem to make sense.
In discussion with the 151 officer who's here in the room, this was deemed as reasonable and sufficient time for her to do the necessary work that will be needed. And we've made the timing as short as possible, haven't we? In order to facilitate what is needed, and that's the proposal before us this evening.
Yes, thank you. Repeat.
What we want to avoid at all costs is work going into an alternative budget that arrives with me and the team too late to be able to review and give a view on and support for your colleagues at council. So rather than give that deadline of when we need the information by, because it's very difficult for us to know, it's encouraging the work to have been done with sufficient time before the council meeting.
But then the consequence of all of this seems to be that everybody gets the budget 48 hours and the alternative budget 48 hours before budgets. I'm not clear whether 48 hours was what Councillor Wallace was after, because I thought you said he wanted more than that. But okay, so
He wanted more than the half an hour he was given in the last budget meeting.
Gotcha. So 40, but then the consequence of all of this seems to be the alternative budgets are squeezed into no time at all, which seems hardly fair, because the publication of the budget from Cabinet, that's the only time at which we know what the actual budget will be.
You see it at
yes, but it can change. Just because it may not, the fact is it could change all the way up to the Cabinet decision. So should it not be that things are pushed back so there is more time given to?
Sorry, I can't see that. We have 2 members of this committee that feel there isn't enough time. I would like to hear from the 2 members of this committee and my deputy chairman on the subject, please.
Well, I think we'd all like to avoid an alternative budget being dropped on us during the meeting, which doesn't allow it. It's not fair to that particular budget because it's can't be properly examined. I think that's the issue. And I also
Phoebe, I've read and reread this many times over now, and I agree with Ms. Keys in that it simply says to me that the alternative budget needs to be confirmed within 6 days. I'm struggling to read into it any other way that compresses the time frame from my perspective.
Thank you. I suggest we move on. There is no support, Councillor Godfrey, for you querying that time frame. I'm sorry, but we've heard from other councillors. I understand it. I think it allows officers time. It allows officers to give assurance to council that that budget does work.
I may make a final point. The 6-day limit, all the work on the alternate budget has to take place before then. At the point that we get to the 6-day point, either the section 151 officer accepts that it is a valid alternative budget, or doesn't. And if that chop has not been given, there is no alternative budget. Now, at 6 days out, there's nothing else to be discussed, decided, or debated. Either you've got the 151 officers approval, or you haven't, and that approval can be gained 3 days out. There's either the 151 officer understands and accepts what's been discussed and can then a day later brief our members, or they can't. Whether it's 3 days out, 6 days out, or 10 days out, it's still a deadline. But if you have it closer to the council meeting, there's more opportunity for the opposition members preparing the alternative budget after the council meeting, after the after the cabinet meeting, after the scrutiny meeting, to prepare something more complex, more serious, more of value. And the period between the approval by the 151 officer and its publication at 48 hours, there's nothing changing about either the proposal, however long that gap is. I don't understand why we have 6 days out before the agenda is published, and not closer to the meeting, say 3 days out.
Because we have been advised that it needs that 6-day clear elapsed time to allow the section 151 officer to do the necessary work. Councillor Cutler.
Sorry, I must admit, I'm reaching a point of finding there is an inconsistency, because I'm not clear what happens between the approval and the publication. And if you've got 4 days, is there anything else that needs to be done in that 4 days? I think that's what Councillor Godfrey's asking. Once the approval's made at 6 days out, it could be published. Now, or alternatively, as Councillor Godfrey is asking, it should be 2 days out, the approval limit. If it's not, if you haven't got the details, I think 2 days is probably too close, because it just means the work piles up, because the section 151 officer's got a lot of other preparation for that council meeting. But so it might be that you publish as soon as it's approved at 6 days out, and then everybody can have time to consider it for a week before council. I don't understand what the separation between approval and publication is. Where you set it perhaps should be a compromise at 4 days. I don't know, but you publish at 4 days, you approve by 4 days out, and you publish by 4 days out. But I don't understand what's happening. There may be things that need to be done in that 4 days, but that's the bit I think Councillor Godfrey is trying to get at, and I don't understand actually what goes on in that 4 days between approval and publication.
I thought we only had 2 days between approval and publication.
No.
4 days. Would you like to take that one, Mrs. Kingston?
I can certainly explain where the 6 days comes from, because the closer to council that deadline is, the greater the risk that I'm unable to review effectively and hopefully support the alternative budget. So that's why we've got 6 clear days before council for me to be able to give that approval. We can certainly take away and consider the proposal about publishing as soon as I can give that approval. Clearly, we need papers to be drawn up to be able to publish something. So there is something to be done between me approving in principle and publishing a paper. But again, the 6 days comes from the fact that the closer that is to council, the greater the risk that I will be unable to do my work and give that confirmation. Chair, just to clarify, are you talking about bringing the publication forward rather than my
Yes.
approval deadline back?
Absolutely.
We still have a problem of amending an agenda which hasn't been published. Because we had council agenda is not published until 5 full days before we're meeting.
Councillor Bolton.
Can I just clarify something with you? Just the way you explained that. Do you see the 4 days that exist between day 6 and the 48 hours before as the period in which you will be working on that? No, good. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that.
So the suggestion I have before me is that consideration be given to the publication of the alternative budget to be after approval by the Section 151 officer. Are we happy with that? I think we need that 6 days. Yes.
That's what the 151 officer has just said.
Yes.
That she needs the
6 days.
So nothing happens in those 4 days. You just want it further away so that it doesn't all condense in on you. Is that correct?
Yeah, depending on the complexity of the proposals that are put to me and the team, depends on how long it takes us to do our review. And so therefore I can't give you a deadline date for submission where I can guarantee to have worked through all of those figures and give an opinion on it. So rather than do that, we've got a date by which we need to have had all those discussions. I need to have had that review and I will give an opinion by. And that needs to be sufficiently far away. So if the papers were given to me 7 days before council, I would only have 24 hours in which to review them. And that runs the risk of me not being able to support the papers. So the closer it is to council, the greater that risk is.
Okay, I understand that now. However, working up a complex budget to push your timelines takes time. And so this is condensing the period for the production of alternative budgets that we need to consider, so that, you know, that just the walls closing in at either end on the data which is published by cabinet and things being pushed back from the budget full council meeting, it's unfair on the production of alternative budgets, and we need to be able to do that in a fair and logical way, don't we? We're not always all in that position. What comes around goes around, as they say.
Sorry.
So in my experience of working with members to come up with alternative budgets, we've always informally insisted that same kind of time frame for having everything agreed before, but it's formalising that so that if we've got multiple alternative budgets that are being worked up, everybody's clear about the timescales required to do that piece of work.
Thank you. Meeting resumed at 10:10. Do we have any other questions on the remainder of the Constitution? What an excellent answer. Thank you. I find that excellent as well. Would you like me to run through the recommendations that we've got in front of us? I think might be useful. Definition of informal working groups to be ordered, to be added. In part 1.2, consideration to be given to making the change from may be to will be. On 22.5, the use of exempt to be reviewed. On page 136, item D to be redrafted. Pages 217 to 220 to be deleted. The start time of 6:30 to be reviewed in due course. And 16.14, consideration be given to using the same process for questions from members of the public as to those for councillors in the interests of expediency. On page 242, 20.5, consideration to be given to bringing publication to be after approval, publication of the alternative budget to be after approval of the section 151 officer. Is that agreed, members? Does that tie up with your list, Nancy? The last one, page 242, section 20.5, consideration to be given to bring in a publication of any alternative budget to be immediately after approval by the section 151 officer. Thank you. Councillor Godfrey.
We also talked about a date for the code of conduct, and when that was going to be. I think that should be one of our recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Just take a moment, and it will be brief, I promise, just to go through the next steps. So I've got here that if this what's proposed, and again subject to the recommendations from this committee, the plan is that this revised constitution will be implemented on the 1st of January for the new year. As I've said, briefings to both councillors and officers will be undertaken, and I think a placeholder has gone out already for members' briefing, with a view to explaining practical implications and the implementation of this. We've talked about the Constitution Working Party continuing and assisting me, the monitoring officer, with a proposal for the adoption of the local government, the LGA Model Code of Conduct, and we are looking to start that in the new year. I'm really keen to do that. And again, working with our parish councils to bring those along with us too. We will also be looking at the petition scheme. That's under review. It's been redrafted, so we need to have a look at that, and that will come forward to the Constitution Working Party as well. And again, any other reviews that that we've picked up again this evening. So yes, that's the plans for kind of moving forward in next steps. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans. Councillor Godfrey.
If I may, we also talked about the the functional features of the constitution, the search facility, and other features, which is I want to have recorded to make sure they were not forgotten along the way. And the second part, as Mrs. Evans mentioned there about CWP continuing, I think there should be is a role for the CWP to be to review the revised constitution prior to publication to council. Just rather than calling this committee forward to double check what's been altered there, a significant number of changes.
Very much, Councillor Godfrey.
Sorry, Councillor Howard, just on that very final point, I would agree that a final meeting of the Constitution Working Party would be helpful. So I support that.
Thank you. Councillor Becker, do you want to make any closing remarks?
I'd just really like to thank the members of the Constitution Working Party. It's actually been a really enjoyable process working closely with you on this and going through. I know that doesn't seem likely on such a long document, but I think it has been, and the epitome of cross-party working and achieving a really good outcome, save for these little minor tweaks that we need to fix or need to address. Now, I wouldn't say fix, but need to consider. Now we've actually worked really well together, and it has been a good exercise. So thank you all for. I don't want to think about how many hours of work it's been looking at this. I also like to thank Mrs. Evans for all of her work on this. I know she's given up many holidays, weekends, evenings, looking at the Constitution. It's very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans. I know it's not been easy. Is there anything else, members, or may I close the meeting? Meeting closed at 10:15. Thank you all for your time.